G'day guys, and today a bit of a change of scene, as you can clearly tell. I just figured it'd be nice, especially nowadays with a lot of people locked inside due to COVID-19, to get out in the sun, get some of that vitamin D, good for your immune system, good for your endocrinal system. And yeah, I figured it would be good to have a little change of scene. But today we're going to be chatting about the root of suffering according to Buddhism. Now, Buddhism is a really interesting practice and or set of philosophy, and I think I like it quite a bit because it seems to have some overlap with Stoicism, talking about how things occur in the world, but it's up to us to sort of gauge and control our reaction to it, rather than sort of surrendering yourself to the mercy of circumstance and this sort of thing. And I was reading a book called Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind, and this is an amazing book, and I really do recommend it. But this one idea, when they began chatting about Buddhism, really stuck out to me, so I thought I'd share with you all today, because it's talking about obviously happiness, which I do on this channel quite a bit. So the book begins by saying that Buddhism shares this idea with some of modern science, which is like talking about how happiness is a biological process, it's something that occurs within you. Now, when you say to people, or when people remark upon that happiness or love or any of these positive emotions we ascribe so much value to as a merely chemical process, that seems to make people quite despondent, or they say it in a way that sort of seems to disparage joy and happiness and love and all this thing. Love is just a chemical, that sort of Rick and Morty fedora tipping Reddit sort of thing. But it doesn't seem to disparage me, and I can't really say why. It's just, that's just the explanation of what it is. It's a mechanism. It doesn't, the mechanisms of my car don't make my car any less valuable, because it runs on a chemical process. I don't care. That's just how a car works, but the car still has immense value to me because it gets me from A to B. Now, obviously, a car is a pretty poor comparison for joy, love, happiness, and all this sort of thing. But again, it's just the underlying mechanism of how something works. That doesn't take anything away from it for me. So yes. So according to Buddhism, people spend a lot of time in their life essentially chasing pleasant feelings whilst attempting to avoid unpleasant feelings. And this ties back into almost everything that you do, even down to minor actions such as scratching an itch or eating a particularly pleasant meal and this sort of thing. And Buddhism claims this is essentially an enormous waste of time because feelings are quite ephemeral. They don't seem to last very long. If you do something to make yourself happy, it may last, a few minutes, a few hours, depending on what you're doing and this sort of thing. But eventually the feeling does go away. And this can cause great anxiety for people because you spend a lot of time chasing after these feelings, but they dissipate almost immediately. And even whilst you're experiencing the sensation itself, it can be quite anxiety provoking because the feeling is eventually going to go away. And I'm sure you've all noticed this at, say, a birthday party or some other celebration. You look at the clock and you realize, there's only 4 hours to go, or that sort of thing. And you recognize that, yes, this fun experience that I'm having will eventually come to an end. And obviously, you wish it could go on forever, but you've got other stuff to do and that sort of thing. So even if you succeed in getting your pleasant feelings, no matter how grand or great they may be, you immediately almost have to start the process of finding and searching and craving for these feelings again, because again, feelings are ephemeral and they dissipate so quickly. Now, the example that they use in the book is very, very interesting. It is an example of a man standing on the seashore and letting the waves come towards him and this sort of thing. And so the metaphor for someone who, I guess, does not ascertain to the messages of Buddhism is that this man stands for decades on the seashore, embracing certain good waves and trying to prevent them from disintegrating back into the ocean, while simultaneously attempting to push back bad waves to prevent them from getting near him. Day in, day out, the man stands on the beach, driving himself crazy with this fruitless exercise. Eventually, he sits down on the sand and just allows the waves to come and go as they please. How very peaceful. And this seems to bear relevance for me. I think this is a good metaphor here, because that's essentially just how pointless, how pointless your actions are. Because you attempt to, you crave and desire and chase after these feelings so much, and on the other hand, attempt to avoid negative feelings as much as you can, but again, they just disintegrate in your hands and they're so ephemeral and temporary. What's the point? It's like me working all day at my job, only to get the money in my hand, it just immediately disintegrates. It's like, what's the point? Why did I go through all that effort going to work if my money is made out of sodium and it just dissipates, or something like that? So yes, very interesting idea there. So according to Buddhism, the root of suffering, the real root of suffering, is this never-ending and ultimately pointless pursuit of ephemeral pleasures. Due to this pursuit, the mind is never satisfied. Even when it experiences pleasure, it is not content, because as we mentioned before, it fears that this feeling might soon disappear. And if it actually gets its cravings, it places great emphasis on these cravings and wants them to intensify and stay. So essentially you're trapped in this enormous cycle of anxiety for basically your whole life, because you're aware that you're deficient in not getting these pleasant feelings, and you're aware of the fear of unpleasant feelings. You chase after them so much, you get a hold of them, and then they just disintegrate away, and you have to start the whole process again. So it's a very, very silly way to be. So you're essentially existing in this cycle of perpetual suffering. And what Buddhism offers is a way out of this. So what Buddhism says is that people are liberated from their suffering, not when they experience this or that fleeting pleasure, but rather when they experience the impermanent nature of their feelings and stop craving them altogether. So this is the aim of Buddhist meditation. You sit down and you attempt to think about all the things that you want in life and recognize how fleeting and temporary they are. And Marcus Aurelius talked about this in Stoicism, and that's obviously where the bridge between those two ideologies comes together for me, because he talks about how everything you want in life, time, your entire life itself, is just an absolute snap moment in history. He talks about one bit of ash falling from the incense. One falls now, one falls later, no difference in the end. Attempting to grasp onto a particular moment of time is like attempting to grasp onto a certain bit of water in a rushing stream. Everything just moves so fast and your life will be over before you even realize it. So yes, the liberation of suffering in Buddhism is removing yourself from ephemeral pleasures by recognizing them as a fruitless temporary pursuit. And I believe I came across this idea in my own personal life a very long time ago back in high school, because I obviously in high school you've got your drama and your gossip and all this sort of thing, who likes who. And people would come up to me and they'd say, "Hey, do you want me to tell you a secret?" And eventually I just sort of recognized that they don't actually want to tell you the secret. They just want to see your reaction and get that quick little dopamine burst and this sort of thing. So eventually I just said, "No, I don't." Like, please stop talking to me and just leave me alone, because again, I recognize that you're not actually interested in me per se, you're more interested in my reaction to it. So that's the recognition of a temporary ephemeral pleasure and pushing away. And perhaps I avoided myself much suffering for it. But again, that's sort of a hidden benefit that I may have attained in my own life. So let's just do a quick little recap of the ideas I've presented in this video. First up is that happiness is an internal process. It's independent of external circumstances, as it is a biological reaction. Obviously, what you do in life can generate these biological reactions in a feedback loop and this sort of thing. Where people go wrong, and what consumerist culture encourages, I would say, is that people chase after feelings they ascribe as being good or pleasant, and they attempt to avoid feelings they ascribe as being unpleasant or ungood, something like that. And they spend a long time chasing after these feelings, and unfortunately for them, these feelings are ephemeral and they dissipate almost immediately. And this causes great anxiety, because you spend so long working so hard for very little reward, and even when you regret the reward, you're acutely aware of how short-lasting it is, and you're aware that it's going to go away, and that only heightens your desire to chase after them, attempt to make them longer, and this sort of thing. It's sort of like filling a sieve full of sand. The sand just leaks out of the sieve, so to attempt to alleviate this problem, you just shove more and more handfuls of sand in, bigger handfuls at more regular intervals, and this sort of thing. But it doesn't actually fix the problem of the sand leaking out of the sieve. So this is the root of suffering according to Buddhism: the endless pursuit of ephemeral and temporary pleasures, or fleeting sensations. The route that Buddhism offers out of this is that we should recognize the value of our pursuits as being ephemeral and temporary and fleeting and dust in the wind and this sort of thing, and recognize that and realize that what we're pursuing is pointless, and abandon the pursuit altogether, letting things come as they may and this sort of thing. So that is the root of suffering according to Buddhism. I hope you were all able to ascertain and derive some value from this video. If you have anything else to add to this conversation, I'd love to hear it down below. Any further readings, things that I may have missed, and this sort of thing. Nowadays, make sure you all get out and get some sun, because a lot of you are locked inside. As I mentioned before, it's very good for your immune system. It's very good for your hormonal system if you're a man, the synthesis of testosterone and this sort of thing. A good time nowadays, now that we're stuck indoors. It's obviously very tempting to just binge on Netflix and this sort of thing, but I believe it presents a very good time for us all to sort of retreat into ideology, and sort of work out what is the good, you know, this sort of thing, things that we may not have time to pursue as much when we're busy with work and this sort of thing. But if we're not, we're presented with a choice. We can instead be animalistic and merely attempt to pleasure ourselves with Netflix and chocolate and whatever, or you could seek a higher good, perhaps attempt to end the cycle of perpetual suffering we're all stuck in. So yeah, that's about all. Thanks for watching.